is one of the least book-related sentences you'll ever hear me say on this channel, hopefully. But I just forgot that my dad's hair dryer basically broke down as I was using it last week, and now I've washed my hair and I can't really dry it. Yeah. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is recmebook, and don't worry, it's summer here, so today I bring you more non-fiction November content. I hope you've been enjoying it. I planned it to fit non-fiction November, but I am hoping of making this a somewhat regular series. You know, my aim is to upload one video a week. I consider 2 of those videos would be a wrap-up and a TBR video. You can see how serious videos would be somewhat sporadic. Anyways, today's video is all about non-fiction that reads like fiction. This is a big selling point nowadays. Narrative fiction is having such a big moment. Not just memoirs, although there are some memoirs. Even though they are low-hanging fruit, I just couldn't resist. Hopefully, as time goes on, there will be less memoirs and there will be more other kinds of books. This video is intended for people who maybe read a lot of fiction and want to cross over into nonfiction but are not sure where to start, but also just people like me who love both and sometimes need something that encompasses both, basically, because we cannot pick. I've focused a lot how format correlates to genre, so I think that might be interesting for you. That's it. Let's get on with the books I want to tell you about. Some of these I've talked about before. Some of these I haven't in the recent present, so let's see. I will link everything I mentioned down below and in the eye if possible, as always. The first one is 84 Charing Crossroads by Helene Henff. This is a very well loved book on booktube and the bookish community in general because it is a book for book lovers. It is the collection of letters between Helene Henff and a bookstore clerk in a bookstore in London during the pre-war years, war years, and I think after war years. What is so interesting about it is that Helene Henff was a writer and she was very New Yorker, sassy, and she just writes so well and it's so hilarious to read. And the relationship that forms is just so nice. You can see the progression of them being strangers and they are very transactional in their letters to becoming friends and like the really strong bond, and then how slowly she starts getting to know his family as well, and she sends them stuff during rationing years during the war, and so it's just such a lovely book to read. But I also feel like because of the external circumstances, it does feel more like a plot than your average letter collection. You know me, I love reading letter collections. This one, maybe by design, it's meant to portray an arc of these people meeting, becoming friends, and the aftermath of that. And so it's very nice to read, but it's also very narrative. If you like epistolary novels, I think this is a really good transition from that to nonfiction. My second recommendation is one book I recently reviewed, and it's A Brief History of Drunkenness by Mark Forsyth. I will leave my history challenge wrap up down below. That's where I talked about that book. This is such a great choice because it's kind of like reading short stories. Each chapter is very much self-contained because it talks about drunkenness as a cultural phenomenon, except in the first chapter where it talks about the biological and evolutionary aspects of inebriation. I think it's such a great step, especially if you want to go from fiction to nonfiction, to feeling you're actually reading nonfiction that is teaching you stuff, that is giving you information, that is not just about people's lives, but at the same time wherein the narrator feels like they are telling you a joke and they are also just telling a really self-contained short story. It's just very, very funny and very nice to read. So I think it's a really good choice. Number 3 is another very popular book on BookTube, and that is Educated by Tara Westover. Now, I feel like as the hype subsides, a lot of people are realizing they didn't love this book as much. I think a lot of people go into it expecting Tara Westover to really talk about her time in college, and this is not a college memoir. It is a family memoir. She grew up in a survivalist family who were also Mormons, but a lot of the things that related to her specific situations were because her father was a survivalist and was into conspiracy theories. It's not just the Mormon aspect. Although there was some of that, it's also not really a religious memoir. I think that's also misleading, and some people go in expecting that, and it's really not. So the educated part is kind of a play on what she learned. She did learn a lot in her childhood, both about toxic relationships, but also just her data. A lot of people question how she would succeed in formal education if the first time she ever set foot in a classroom was in college. And a lot of people have questioned her economic situation as well, which she never said was bad. She always made it very clear that she was learning some things. It's just that it's so much about what she was taught as what she wasn't, and how that is so different from what we are taught at school, basically. And then how she went on to Cambridge and studying history, and what history means for her, who was kept from it for so long. It's just very interesting. And I think what is most narrative about it is that Tara Westover is a historian, and though she's not artfully crafting this story, she still talks a lot about memory and narrativeness, and how we think of our lives as narrative, and how history is basically a narrative from where you exclude and include things. And I think if you like, for example, literary fiction, perhaps this is not as literary as other memoirs that I've read, but it deals with similar meta concerns, if that makes sense. I think it's really, really valuable, but I think you should go in expecting many different aspects all coming together within this family narrative, rather than it being about education itself or like formal education itself. My next recommendation is a completely different type of memoir, and it's Stir, which I recently reviewed in my October wrap-up. I will link it up below, and EVI. And it's a really cool food memoir, complete with recipes that you can try out, about this woman who suffers from a brain injury, how she moves past that by focusing on food. But it's also just her relationship with food in general, from childhood to her parents breaking up, to her meeting her now husband. All of that is so great. She also has a blog, and it's a bit of that story in a blog. It is a bit of a superficial novel, that's what I will say. However, it's so nice and easy to read. I think if you like what is called women's fiction, which I'm not 100% sure where the line is between that and like literary fiction focused on women. It's all very complicated with genre, but basically I think if you like that sort of thing, you will enjoy this. It's like a nice, light, but still somewhat emotional and engaging afternoon film, basically. And I think it's sometimes exactly what one needs. The next one is a classic, A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I am not the biggest Hemingway fan, quite honestly. I understand how revolutionary he was in context. I do think that his short stories are much stronger than his full-length novels. I've read like 2 or 3, and they've had their moments, but I've also been very bored, although I was younger, so I don't know, maybe I need to revisit him. However, A Movable Feast I loved, and I actually think you should read it more as autofiction than actual memoir, because he clearly is writing from a very personal point of view, where unlike Tara Westover isn't concerned with truth at all. Like, he just wants to reminisce and give his point of view. So it's kind of like talking to your grandpa in the evening, which I love doing. So just throwing that out there. You don't have to be concerned with the facts as much as the telling. And it also, of course, does say a lot about how Hemingway felt when he wrote A Movable Feast, which basically is a memoir of his time in Paris, being part of the so-called lost generation. It's just such a cool scene. You know, I love that period. And he talks in particular about meeting F. Scott Fitzgerald. They had such a tremendous relationship, but it's so nice to see him through Hemingway's eyes when they first met, because it's the description of love, you guys. Like, he talks about what a stand-up guy Fitzgerald was and how lovely his smile was, and I just really enjoyed that. Also, it's nice to see him repent about some of the awful things he did to his first wife. It's again very low bar kind of reparation, but still nice detail. I really recommend it. If you do pick it up though, pick up the restored version by, I think, the grandchildren. Don't read the originally published version, which was so heavily edited by his current wife because she wanted to take out everything that was very favorable to his first wife, and just this is the version that I read, which I got at Strand per suggestion of one of the salespeople many years ago. I don't know if it's the only one with the restored text, but I would urge you to pick up something like this. This is closer to what Hemingway was planning on publishing before he passed away. The following book is The Secret Life of Oscar Wilde by Neal McKenna. This is focused on his queer life, basically. His relationship with Bosie, which is really idealized, by the way, and his relationship with rent boys, and just the general gay scene in London at that time. I have such a weird relationship with this book because it is such a fun book to read. If you love slow-paced, really hefty tones to immerse yourself into, and you're interested in LGBT plus history, then you will love this. However, I do think that McKenna's interpretation or framing of certain facts is questionable, let's say. However, I do feel it reads like fiction, and that's the point of this video. And if you're interested in that whole scene, it's just such a delight. It's really well written. It's really engagingly written. I still recommend it every chance I get. I still endorse it, I guess, is what I'm saying, because I'm trash. Then I have another writer book, and is The Trip to Echo Spring by Olivia Laing. This reads a lot like a documentary that has dramatizations in between. If you like that sort of thing, I think this is a good one to pick up. It's basically about the relationship between writers and alcoholism, combined with Olivia Laing's personal narrative of growing up with a mother who was an alcoholic, or I think her mother's partner was. And also she's doing this sort of pilgrimage through the US, going to all these authors' houses. So it's travel writing as well. This is less one narrative, more like one overarching narrative with little narratives. That's why I said it reads a lot like a documentary, where you have like those little narrative threads. But I do think it's very engaging and keeps you reading. By the way, those authors are all American authors. They are Carver, Cheever, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Berryman. I'm forgetting. The next book is one that I haven't reviewed yet, so this is a bit of a sneak peek into my November wrap-up, and it's Scenes from a Revolution by Mark Harris, which I think is the UK title, and that US title is Pictures from a Revolution, I think. Basically, this is the story of the 5 Oscar-nominated films of 1963, how they came to be, why they were nominated, what that meant in the back then current Hollywood landscape, which the author posits was the tipping point from the old Hollywood to the new Hollywood. And I devoured this. I wanted to keep reading it so bad. It's a middle-sized book. My hardback cover, which is like this, has like 430 pages of actual information, plus, you know, the notes. So I'd say maybe on paperback it would be longer. That said, it reads like a multi-generational or like a parallel story long book. It reads like Game of Thrones in the sense that there are all these different viewpoints that are operating simultaneously in their own timelines. It's so great. It is slow. Like if you're looking for a fast-paced nonfiction, this is not it. But again, if you read things that are slow, that take their time building character, this is exactly that. To be fair, I don't think this will make you love films if you don't already like them, or maybe are interested in Hollywood as a phenomenon. A lot of it is about making a movie and how just complicated it is and how slow of a process it is from getting the initial idea and the initial treatment to actually shooting a film and then what comes after. But I think it's just really like a narrative. That's the point. It is like a story. That's how it's told. And it's like all these movies are characters and they are being born and developing, and in the end they will meet at the ceremony. So I think it's actually a great choice if you like movies and you like thick tomes with many characters. And my last recommendation for this video is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Gottlieb. This I read earlier this year. I don't think I had time to wrap it up because I read it in February and I didn't do a February wrap up, but I did talk about it in my mid-year freakout tag, I think, because it is one of the best books that I'd read this year back then. I don't know if it will make it to my top 10, we'll see. I'm considering doing an honorable mentions video too, so we'll see how that goes. In any case, this is about Gottlieb, who used to write for TV, switching careers to become a therapist and also seeking therapy herself and therapy in general, and why you should get therapy and what to expect from therapy and why it works, why it doesn't. It's so good, but in terms of structure, it reads like a TV show. It's so funny, but it's also so emotional and it keeps you reading. It's so weird. When I was reading, actually, I kept wondering why that was the case. And then when Lori reveals that she worked on TV, it was like, okay, that's what it reminds me of. That's what it feels like. You're reading episodes and you want to keep binging on them. It's just such a great book to pick up. Once again, especially if you like so-called women's fiction, I think it's a really good choice. But just if you're curious about therapy, you know what it does and how it's done. Granted, this is very US centric. As someone who has consulted a bunch of professionals throughout my life, it's not quite like that in Chile, for example. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but I do take it with a grain of salt that this is how it operates in the US. However, I think the principal ideas of therapy as a general concept do transfer well. And as I said, the structure is chef kiss. It's so engaging and I really enjoyed it. That was it. Did you enjoy this video? I hope you did, because I enjoyed thinking about these titles and I enjoyed telling you about them in different terms than I usually would. So I hope that worked for you. I'm going to keep searching for more. I already have some ideas, so please do let me know if you enjoy them. More content coming to your device. Anyways, please like and subscribe. Tell me, have you read any of these books? Are you inclined to pick them up now that I've talked about them? And see you next time.